Okay, so this is our last section for the day. S squared plus 7s plus 12 equals 0. What's different? What's different about this question from everything else we did today and yesterday? One little symbol. Equals. That makes a big difference. You want to realize when that equals is in there, you need to go a little further in the question. So basically, we start by just doing what we've been doing yesterday and today. Let's factor, right? How do we factor this? 3 terms. We do FOIL, right? FOIL. 2 parentheses, right? Can you tell my S's from my 5? Those are S's. There are no 5s in this problem. So S times S is S squared. Good. And what times what is 12? 4 and 3 makes 12. Right? Remember, you multiply to be the back number, you add to be the middle. So just plus on both. They make 7 in the middle. It's okay if I skip showing the little arcs at this point, the little happy faces things. They would make the 7 in the middle, right? Now, normally, if there was no equal sign, I would stop right here. I'd say done. There we go. It's factored. We're done. But because I do have an equal sign, I'm actually going to take another step. I'm going to keep going beyond the parentheses. That's what's new about this section. That's the only difference. This won't be a very hard section for you. If you're good at factoring, most of the work will just be factoring. And if you're already good at that, most of the work will be just repeat. The only new part is after you're done factoring, you have to do one more step. What is that step? You take each of the parentheses parts, really, well, not just parentheses, but any part that has a letter, and set it equal to 0. It gets its own 0. We're going to have 2 equal zeros there. And then solve each one separately. How do you get S alone here? Just subtract the 4, right? And here you subtract the 3. And what do we got? S equals negative 4. S equals negative 3. And that's it. So they want 2 answers, negative 4, negative 3. They want them with a comma. Doesn't matter what order. You don't need parentheses. It's not a graphing thing. It's just give the 2 answers with a comma. Any order doesn't matter. The answers are negative 4 and negative 3. Why did we set each one equal? Why did we do equal 0, equal 0? We only had 1 equal 0. Why could we go into 2? I don't want to just, I want to give you a reason for that, so it's not just Mr. Heron says so. Think about if I said, hey, I'm thinking of 2 numbers, and they multiply. I'm multiplying these 2 numbers in my head, and the answer is coming out 0. What do you know about my numbers? If 2 numbers multiply to be 0, what do you know about those numbers? What could they be? If 2 numbers multiply to be 0. So if you times them and it comes out 0, how do you times 2 things and the answer is 0? Times them, not add them. Because then they'd be, one of them's negative if you're adding them. But if you're timesing them and it's coming out 0, what does one of them have to be? 0. One of them has to be 0, huh? Does that make sense? Right? So that's what this is saying. I don't know if you see it that way, but that's what it's saying. In other words, it's saying, hey, this times, right, parentheses times, this is equaling 0. So that means the first one could be 0, or the second one could be 0, right? Because 0 times anything would be 0, and anything times 0 would be 0, right? Right? If you have 2 things timesing to be 0, that's what this is saying. Something times something, number times number is equaling 0. Like number times number is equaling 0. Well, that means the first one could be 0, or the second one could be 0. Because either way, they'll times to be 0, huh? So that's why we can go from 1 equals 0 to 2 equal zeros, because the first one could be 0 or the second one could be 0, either way, and then we get our answers. That's the method. That's the only new thing. So you don't stop at the parentheses. You give them each their own 0 and solve. That's the only new part in this section. Let's try. Okay, so b squared plus 2b minus 35 equals 0. So try that one. Same thing, do the two parentheses, you know, the factoring, but don't stop at the parentheses because it has an equal sign. Keep going. Give them each their own equal 0 and finish. Okay, what multiplies to be 35? 7 and 5. Sign in the middle, sign on the bigger, right? The sign in the middle is always goes on the bigger, huh? Plus 7 minus 5 makes plus 2 in the middle. Remember, you multiply to be the back, you add to be the middle, remember? Good so far. Now, if there was no equal sign, I would just stop right there. Say done. That's what I did all day yesterday, all day today, up to now, huh? All the rest of chapter 5. Let's just stop right here. But because there is an equals, we keep going. We set the first one equal to 0 or the second one equal. They each get their own 0. Because if two things times to be 0, either one could be 0 to make that happen. And then finish. So how do we finish this one? We subtract 7 from both. Minus 7. How do we finish the other one? We add 5 to both. And it's 5. So what are our answers? Negative 7 and 5 with a comma. Either order, put the 5 first and the negative 7, whatever. Hey, do y'all see it's just going to be opposite signs? Want to save some time, right? Whatever sign it has in the parentheses, it's just going to be opposite sign in the end because it goes the other side, you know? Negative 5 in the parentheses, positive 5 in the answer, right? Just save some time like that. Is that good? We good with that? All right, so it's just the same thing we've been doing, but now you have one extra step. So t squared minus 8t equals 0. So same thing, can you factor that one? All right, so what should we do here? Yeah, this is just a GCFer, isn't it? Just what's in common? What do these guys, remember that's always the first step in factoring, right? What do they have in common? What's the GCF? It's just T, isn't it? So it's one parenthesis, not two. Everybody getting the hang of the GCF thing now? Now that we've been working on it for 3 hours, right? Just take out the GCF, which is T. T alone. What does that leave? T times T and T times minus 8. Good? Now, if there was no equal sign, I'd be done. Just stop, good, got it, done. But because we do have an equal sign, we keep going. The first one equals 0, or even the T alone. The T alone equals 0, or the T minus 8 equals 0. Is that good? This one's done. That's one of my answers. Nothing more there. The other one, add the 8, because you got to get the T alone. The T's not alone here yet. 8. So the answers are 0 and 8. 0 and 8. Does that make sense? Yeah. What are we doing? Do you realize we're finding answers that make it true? Like, if you come back here, what we're saying is if you let T be 0 in both cases, if you plugged in 0 for t, it's going to make it true. Well, of course. We should have seen that one coming, right? 0 squared minus 8 times 0 is 0. Yeah, of course. Will the 8 work? Is 8 squared minus 8 times 8 equal to 0? Well, yeah, 64 minus 64 equals 0. So you see, you only let t be one thing at a time. You don't let it be 0 here and 8 there. It's either 0 in both or 8 in both. But either way, 0 in both or 8 in both, it makes it true, doesn't it? Those are the two values that make the original equation true, and the only values that do that. That's what we're finding. Now with number 6, we'll get the full deal. What do I mean by the full deal? Let me give you the plan. So when you have x squared with an equal sign, what's the game plan? Step number 1. So now this one's got everything to it. Get a 0 on one side. That's what I haven't been mentioning up to now because they've been automatically doing it for me. If they don't give you a 0, see how this one has b squared equals 16. There's no 0. I've got to get a 0. So that's the first step. Step 2, then you factor, like with the parentheses. And step 3, each one gets their own 0. So there's the 3 steps. Let's go up here and do it. So what I'm saying is, up here on this problem, on step number 1, I've got to get a 0. So when you see x squared or b squared, whatever, with an equal sign, you need to think, oh, first step, get a 0. First step, get a 0. I've got to get a 0. So how do I get a 0? Subtract the 16. Boom, 0. Huh? That making sense so far? You gotta literally make there be 0. So what's the other side now? B squared minus 16 equals 0. See how I did step 1, got a 0? Is that good? Step 1, get a 0. Now, so step 1, check. Step 2, factor. Factor, meaning like the parentheses, right? So I got to do some parentheses here. Got to run out of room. So when you factor, how do you factor b squared minus 16? Yeah, b plus 4, b minus 4, either order doesn't matter. That's an FL, as we've been doing for a long time today. Right? Everybody good with that? 1 plus 1 minus? That's step 2. And then finally, step 3, each one gets its own 0. Right? So you say, okay, b plus 4, you get your own 0. B minus 4, you get your own 0. Right? You go from 1 0 to each one getting their own 0 because if two things times to be 0, either one could be 0. And then you know the drill. Subtract 4, so it's negative 4. Add 4. So it's positive 4. So the answers are negative 4 and positive 4, aren't they? Everybody okay with that? Maybe I squeezed that in too much. We okay? Right? B minus 4 is 0. So I added 4 to both sides. So minus 4 and plus 4 are the two answers. Good? Questions on that? So you just want those two answers with a comma. Either order doesn't matter. No parentheses. All right. Okay, so I'm going to make that an x. X squared plus 1 is 2x. X squared plus 1 is 2x. Okay, so when you see x squared, so here it is, x squared with an equal sign. That's what needs to jump off a lot of the course from this point forward is recognition. You got to see something and move into action. So you see x squared with an equal sign, you think, what's my first step? Get a 0. Get a 0. I think just knowing the first step will really help you. We can put it on a 3x5 card also. So get a 0. Get a 0. So first step, get a 0. Get a 0. So how am I going to get a 0? Yeah, get rid of that 2x. Whatever's on the right side, just ice it. Just get rid of it, right? Just negate it. Do the opposite of it. Whatever's on the right side, just do the opposite so that the right side becomes 0. Make sense? Whatever you have on that right side, just do the opposite. What is the left side now? X squared minus 2x plus 1. Put them in order. 3 terms. We go highest power to lowest, right? So that's step 1. Get a 0. Step 2. Factor. Do the parentheses. So parentheses. All right, what do we got? X is minus 1 minus 1. Is that okay? Because those, remember, they got to multiply to be plus 1 and add to be minus 2. So minus 1 adds to be minus 2, multiplies to be plus 1. Good with the parentheses? Final step. Step 3. Each one gets their own 0. So the first x minus 1 gets a 0, and the second x minus 1 gets a 0. But that's silly. That's the same equation twice. So just solve it once. Add 1 to both sides. X is positive 1. It's going to be the same thing twice. So the answer is just 1. You don't list it twice. It's the same answer. It's just 1. Is that really the answer? Put a 1 back in the beginning. Does it make it true? 1 squared plus 1, that's 2. Does that equal 2 times 1? Sure, that's 2. Yep. 1 is the value that makes that thing true. Well, really? Well, what about 0? Doesn't 0 make it true? Nope. Put a 0 in there. 0 squared is 0 plus 1. The left side's 1. The right side's 2 times 0, 0. 1 doesn't equal 0. 0 does not make that thing true, but 1 does. 1 is the only number that makes it true. Is that good? I'm making sense on that? So when you see x squared with an equal sign, get a 0. And then factor, and each one gets their own 0. Couple more here. So there's not anything new. The only thing new is the last step of setting each one equal to 0. So I'm going to go x again. 2x squared is 7x. So as soon as you see that, you think, get a 0. Because you got x squared with an equal sign. Right? Get a 0. So first step, get a 0. So subtract 7x from both sides like that, right? Whatever's on that right side, you just do the opposite of it. Don't you? To make it 0. So we have 2x squared minus 7x equals 0. We good so far? Now what? Step 2. Factor. Yeah, and factoring, the first step in factoring is GCF. So as you look at these guys, what's the GCF? Just x, huh? Just take out an x. Leaves 2x minus 7. Am I going too quick? Is that making sense? Everybody seeing what I'm doing there? So for what I do, first step, you get a 0, right? Whenever you have x squared, you get a 0. Then you factor. And now what do we do from here? Step 3. Each one gets their own 0. So x alone and 2x minus 7. X alone gets a 0, and 2x minus 7 gets a 0. Is that okay? This one's done. The other one, we need to finish getting x alone over there. Right? Add 7 to both. Divide by 2. 7 halves. The answers are 0 and 7 halves. How am I doing? Am I going too quick? Is that making sense? So again, when you got x squared, you got to get a 0. First thing, whatever's on the right side, just get rid of it, right? Get a 0, factor, and each one gets their own 0. Questions? Don't have two. Number 15. So w squared minus 3w is 14 plus 2w. Okay. So you do the first step. What's the first step when you see x squared, or w squared, with an equal sign? Get a 0. How am I going to get a 0? Do the opposite of these guys. Make that right side become 0. You with me? Right? Minus 14 minus 2w. That right side is gonzo, 0. See, I just force it to happen. You make the right side be 0. And whatever you do to one side, you have no choice but do the same thing to the other to keep the balance, right? So I got to go minus 14 minus 2w over there as well, don't I, to keep the balance in the equation, right? Does that make sense? I'm always forcing a 0 over there. Gather like terms on the left side. Can you gather the like terms? Get w squared minus 5w minus 14. Is that okay? Step 2. Factor, parentheses. Right? How do we factor? What? It's FOIL. It's multiply. It's add. What multiplies to be 14? 7 times 2. Sign in the middle. It's taken by the bigger. Minus 7 plus 2. I mean, that adds to be minus 5 in the middle, multiplies to be minus 14 at the back. Right? And then finally, step 3, each one equals 0. So w minus 7 is 0, w plus 2 is 0. And then, I'll just say positive 7, negative 2. It's just opposite sign, huh? 7 and negative 2. So, if they don't have an equal sign, so you don't get confused on this, if they don't have an equal sign, you stop at the parenthesis, huh? But if they do have an equal sign, you got that extra step where you set each one to 0. Don't you? That's what's different. Well, I've been talking at you for 3 hours now with lots and lots